So I'm now going to give you some pretty practical things that I think will work in any organization at all. And I hope you can find some room in there for your organization. First rule: no organization will ever get better unless the leaders are willing to admit that something's wrong with their organization. No organization is ever going to get better unless the leaders are willing to admit that something's wrong. When I first came in the Army, we ran what we called annual training tests. And they would take us out and we'd run over hill and dale for about a week. Everybody was running around behind us with little clipboards writing stuff down. At the end of the week, they'd run us into a hot, stuffy classroom where we'd probably fall asleep because we didn't care what they wrote down on those clipboards. The only thing we cared about was the final grade. And so we'd wake up about the time the final grade was coming, and it was always the same: 98.5%. Now, even to this young, inexperienced second lieutenant, I knew that outfit wasn't that good. I knew I was that good. As a matter of fact, I was better than that. I knew that. But you know, I knew the outfit wasn't that good. But because we got that grade, we never changed anything. You don't change when you're 98.5% good. So every single year, we went back and we trained on exactly the same subjects we trained on before. Okay, and we allocated our fuel to exactly what we allocated to before, and we allocated our ammunition to exactly what we allocated to before, and we allocated our funds to exactly what we allocated before, and most of all, we made sure we did over and over again those things that we really do well, so that when our bosses came down and looked at us, we looked good, and boy, they thought we were terrific. You don't change when you're 98.5% good. During those days, in the 50s and 60s, some Department of Defense organizations adopted a motto: zero defects. Now, zero defects is a great motto if you're in the business of manufacturing critical equipment that's going to be used in an operating room in a life-saving circumstance. But zero defects is the stupidest motto you can ever adopt when you're in an organization like the Department of Defense. It's totally people-dependent. You are going to have defects, whether you like it or not. We went to a place called Vietnam. Guess what? We discovered we had a few defects. So when Vietnam was over, we recognized that our assets were going to dry up completely. Our assets were going to, allocation was going to be meager at best. And those of us that decided to stick around and say, you know, we've got to start doing something different here. We've got to start admitting what's broken out there. And we've got to take these very meager assets we're going to get and apply them to things that are broken, rather than just doing the same thing over and over, year after year after year. And I'm sure somebody out there will say, well, of course you did. That is so logical. Listen, that is a basic philosophical change in the mindset of the United States Army. Up until that time, you're supposed to be can-do Army. Schwartz, can your outfit do this? Can do, sir. Can your outfit do that? Can do, sir. Can your outfit leap over the Empire State Building single bound? Can do, sir. Is your outfit more powerful than locomotive? Can do, sir. I mean, you never said can't do. Matter of fact, if you said can't do, they'd say, get rid of that bum. We don't want him around here who doesn't have a can-do attitude. But now you see, we are suddenly asking our leaders to say, can't do. I expect to go down to a battalion that's training out in the field. And I say to the battalion commander, what are you doing today? He says, sir, we're doing D. And I say, why are you doing D? And he said, because we went to the National Training Center 6 months ago, and I found out this outfit is very good at A, B, and C, but they are terrible at D, and therefore I am training them on D. And you look out, and sure enough, they look terrible out there, and you're glad. And you go right next door to exactly the same kind of battalion, and they're doing X, Y, Z. You say to the commander, why in the world are you doing X, Y, Z? The guy over there is doing D. He said, hey, we can do D fine. And we can do A through W fine. I just found out that we're not very good at X, Y, Z, and we're out here doing X, Y, Z, and sure enough, they look terrible, and you are happy about it. Okay? Now, it may not seem like much, but that single philosophy made the difference between the quality of the army that we sent to Vietnam and the magnificent army we sent over to Desert Storm. Just that little thing alone was the principal thing that made a difference. Organizations will never get better unless the leadership is willing to admit that something is wrong. Now, there's a corollary to that. You all remember that before the Gulf War, Saddam Hussein in Iraq fought an 8-year war against Iran. At the end of 6 years, they were broke. You know, Iraq is the second largest oil producer second largest oil producer in the Gulf. If they applied the revenues from their oil sales to the standard of living of their people, they'd have one of the highest standard of living in the world. But instead, they had spent all of their money on acquiring arms and ammunition and the weapons that you're hearing about today and all that sort of business. And by the end of 6 years, they were flat broke. They had borrowed from all over the Gulf, which was one of the causes eventually of the Gulf War. And Saddam Hussein recognized the problem this was going to cause within his country. So he called in a group of his closest friends and advisors. And he explained the situation to them and said, look, I want a brainstorming session here. I want you to be open with me, and we got to come up with a solution. So does anybody have any ideas? One of his closest friends raised his hand and said, Mr. President, you are so closely identified in the eyes of the Iranians with this war that it's hard to believe we will be able to negotiate a settlement so long as you're president. So why don't you step aside as president for 6 months? We will negotiate a settlement with the Iranians. At the end of 6 months, we'll make you president again. Saddam Hussein went over and grabbed his friend, took him through the door, and shot him dead. Came back into the room and said, okay, now does anybody else have a good idea here, okay? We laugh. Tragically, that is a true story, by the way. But we laugh, but every single one of us has been in an organization where the leadership has said, okay, I really value what you have to say. I want you to speak up and tell me what's troubling you. And the first person that says something negative, bang, we shoot the messenger, okay? Organizations will only get better if leaders are willing to admit what is wrong. And you must have a climate within your organization where people are allowed to say that something's wrong. Good leaders don't tell people how to do their job. Don't get me wrong. They tell people what to do. They allocate resources. They establish standards. They discuss concepts. They talk timelines, and they talk expectations. They do all of that. But they don't tell people how to do their job. I think for 2 reasons. Number one, if they got a half a brain, they understand they don't know how to do every job in the organization better than everybody else. That's why you got all these other people in your organization. But more importantly, I think they understand that old geometry theorem. The whole is the sum of the parts. Okay? They understand what I choose to call the synergy of individual initiative. They understand that if you go ahead and challenge people to do what they know how to do best, and you give them the authority, and you give them the resources to go out and do what they know to do best. And if that's happening throughout your entire organization, when all of the pieces of your task come together, it's going to exceed anything you ever imagined possible in your life because you allow this synergy of individual initiative to take place. Great leaders do not tell people how to do their job. Now, what about lousy leaders? Well, lousy leaders are so lacking in confidence in themselves, they don't have any confidence in anyone within their organization. So they don't allow anybody in their organization to make any decisions at all. But because they have no confidence, they don't make them either. And the whole organization sits out there awaiting guidance, awaiting instructions, awaiting direction, and when it doesn't come, one of 2 things happens. Number one, the organization stagnates, or worse yet, the organization starts pulling itself apart in 20 different directions. Okay? Great leaders don't tell people how to do their job. Now forget everything I told you. Now just forget it all. Because I am now going to give you the 2 roles to 21st century leadership. And all you got to do is remember these 2 rules, and you will be a great leader in the 21st century. I was a brand new Major General. I'd just been promoted to Major General. That was the good news. The bad news was I got assigned back to the Pentagon. Walked in the Pentagon, and they made me the number 2 man in charge of personnel for the United States Army, Active Reserve, and National Guard, about 4.5 million people at the time. I'd been in my job 1 week, and I came walking to the Pentagon. My boss comes walking out of his office with a suitcase, and he says, Schwartz, I'm heading for Germany. I'm going to visit the troops over in Europe, and then after I visit the troops in Europe, I'm going to swing over to the Far East, and I'll visit the troops in the Far East, and I'll be back in about a month. And he picked up his bag and walked out the door, headed down the hall of the Pentagon, and I absolutely panicked. I ran out the door behind. I said, wait a minute. I have been here 1 week, for crying out loud. What am I supposed to do if the Chief of Staff of the Army calls, or the Secretary of the Army, or the Secretary of Defense, or some dumb politician from over there on the Hill calls? What am I supposed to do? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, Rule 13. I said, yes, sir, Rule 13. Do you mind telling me what Rule 13 is? And he said, sure, Rule 13. When placed in command, take charge. When placed in command, take charge. Remember I talked about leaders accepting responsibility, leaders making things happen? This same boss one day was receiving a briefing on a very complicated subject, and I know he didn't understand 1 word of that briefing because I didn't understand 1 word of that briefing. I was a hell of a lot smarter than he was, but I never told him that because he was a hell of a lot higher ranking than I was. But anyhow, But to my amazement, at the end of the briefing, he made a decision and sent this decision out to be implemented throughout the entire United States Army. So when everybody left the room, I said to him, I know you didn't know anything about that subject before they came in here, and I know you didn't understand that briefing. How could you possibly have made a decision? He said, Norm, you know what? I may have made the wrong decision just now. Doesn't make any difference. Doesn't make any difference. He says that problem has been in the Pentagon for 6 years. For 6 years, nobody has understood that problem well enough to make any kind of decision at all. He said, I may have just made the wrong decision. It doesn't make any difference, because what I've done is I've moved this problem out to this great army of ours where there are thousands of individuals who, even if I have made the wrong decision, will turn it around and make it the right decision, and we'll be well on our way to solving this problem. But if I had not made a decision today, 1 year from now, we'd be visiting the same problem right here in the Pentagon. It would have been in the Pentagon for 7 years, and we'd be no further along in the solution of this problem than we are today. Rule 13, when placed in command, take charge. Do something. Just do something. Grab the responsibility and do something, and it really doesn't make any difference what it is you do. Take charge. I said, okay, man, I'm getting ready. I'm going to take charge. And he picked up his bag and he started to walk down the hall, and I walked behind him and I said, but could you give me a little bit of guidance? What should I do about the recruiting program, and what should I do about the enlistment program? What should I do about the re-enlistment program? What should I do about the promotion program? And what should I do about the Women in the Army study? And what should I do about the Equal Opportunity study? And what should I do about human relations? And he turned around to me and he said, Rule 14. I said, yes, sir. And he said, Schwartzkopf, do what's right. Do what's right. Notice he didn't say, do what you think the Chief of Staff of the Army wants you to do. He certainly didn't say, do what you think I'd want you to do. He very definitely did not say, do what makes you look good. No. He said, do what's right. And you see, now we've come full circle right back to this character business again. Because you know what? When the truly tough decisions have to be made, we normally know right here what the right thing to do is. The tough part is doing it. And especially when no one's there. When no one's there to grade your paper. When no one's there to say he really knew what the right thing to do was, but he went ahead and did the wrong thing anyhow. When you can get away with doing the wrong thing. That's when this thing called character becomes so important. Rule 14, do what's right.